My name is Michael Battelle, and I'm the president and founder of the Fatty Liver Alliance. We raise awareness about the risks, causes, and complications of fatty liver disease and help those already diagnosed with MASLD and MASH by advocating for access to approved treatments and care. Our very special guest today is Gina Villiotti-Madison, who is the executive director and board member of a nonprofit 501c3 corporation, Liver Education Advocates, who are based in the Pittsburgh area. You can learn more about their organization on their website. Just to make sure I share it, it is liveradvocates.org. In part 8 of our 10-part Liver Insights 2 series, we're going to be speaking about mental health and coping with chronic conditions like MASLD and MASH. Gina, when patients are first diagnosed, there's very often an emotional impact to both the patient and their family. You and your family have gone through so much, and yet it seems like you always have a positive outlook. How have you been able to balance the burden of this liver disease and stay optimistic and solution oriented?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike, and I appreciate you having me on here today. So, when you are diagnosed with the burden of a chronic disease, especially like MASLD or MASH, a lot of times it's very shocking and it can be frightening, right? But I've always lived by this belief that to live with an attitude of gratitude. So I think there's a lot of different things to really think about when you're thinking about, coping with a chronic condition, especially MASLD or MASH, which is still very highly misunderstood, especially by a lot of doctors sometimes, which can add to the frustration. But I once read something that said that you cannot have gratitude and anxiety living in your brain at the same time. So I'm not going to sit here and say that life's all, rainbows and roses and
Unicorns?
that yeah, unicorns and like everything's
Right.
perfect because obviously when my dad was diagnosed, it was very scary, and you have that moment. And I think it's okay to live in that fear or that anxiety for a brief moment and just kind of experience it, right? Let yourself feel those feelings. But I think what can happen is when you sit there and you isolate and you let the brain just start to go and you get into Dr. Google and you start thinking about all these fearful things, you can go down a very scary path. So what my family did, which I think is so important for any patient or caregiver in a situation like we were when my dad was diagnosed, and my dad went through that whole journey. He was very fortunate and blessed to get a liver transplant, but it was a very scary path going down there. But it's reaching out to people, right? When you reach out to people and you surround yourself with a support system, it helps kind of inherently boost that positivity. Looking for credible facts as well and credible information about the disease, because I personally believe that we live in a society that tries to just initiate fear in every direction. And you can easily go onto Google and find all of these things. I mean, my mom runs a liver disease support group. And she talks to a lot of people that are newly diagnosed, like patients and family members. And she will get calls sometimes in the middle of the night. She will get calls, we'll be on vacation or things like that. And there's one person that we remember, she shares the story so often, that called her and said, I think I'm going to die tomorrow. And that can be very scary. So there's some things that you can do to really help kind of train your brain, if you will. So I never shy away from the fact that I'm in recovery from drugs and alcohol. And I think that, no matter what, that there's a lot of similarities there between facing a chronic disease and some of the coping mechanisms, if you will, that I've learned through recovery. And that first is that attitude of gratitude. So yes, you may be facing this chronic condition and it may be very scary, but what can you be grateful for today? And I wake up every single morning and I just am grateful that I woke up and that I'm able to take a breath today. And then some days it could be little things. There might be days when you're facing, MASH and MASLD where you don't even want to get out of bed. There might be days where you feel sick that you can't get out of bed. So what can you do, in the confines of your bed where you can just be grateful that you're alive? Maybe it's just laying around and watching TV, or maybe it's just reading something. Maybe it's making a phone call to somebody, and just being honest. That's another piece, honesty. I think being honest with how you feel and what you're going through. And that's where the support system comes in, comes into play so critically is, hey, I'm just not feeling it today. Because I think we all can say definitively that when somebody is facing mental health challenges that result from chronic disease, that you will see an increase in depression and anxiety. And a lot of times that does go hand in hand. So it's so important to surround yourself with a support system. In recovery, we call it a sponsor. Some people will call it an accountability partner. There's, a fellowship. But it's really important, whether it's one person that you have that like trusted person that you can call no matter what. I think it's important to have a few different mechanisms. So that one person, because some people don't have family. Some
Mhm.
people do not have the family to be there support for them. So, you can find a trusted person through a support group if you don't have friends and family who understand what you're going through. And I do think support groups are very, very important. For me personally, as I said, I belong, I'm in recovery, so I belong to different fellowships and I go to meetings and I go to in-person meetings, and those are really helpful for me because I could walk in, even though I'm a very positive person, that doesn't mean I don't have moments where my brain or this anxiety or like, bouts of depression kind of kick in. And when I do is I make myself aware that that is happening and I get myself to a meeting. I call a friend, I call a family member, and I can tell you from me personally, whenever I walk into a meeting, I never walk out the same person that I was. I walk out more positive. I walk out with strategies for what to do. And we see the same thing in our own support group. We at Liver Education Advocates have a liver disease support group. I know that TRIO, right, the Transplant Recipient International Organization has a support group as well. The Sober Livers organization has a support group. There's several support groups. All you have to do is look online, and they can be, and ours is virtual, and I think virtual is very helpful as well because you go in and you can be very transparent and very open and share with others what you're feeling. Hey, I'm just not feeling it today. I feel like I did this to myself, which we hear so often, and that cannot be the furthest thing from the truth, right? Some of us are just metabolically built differently. And just because of those food choices, getting in that mindset of I did this to myself is one of the worst places you can be. I mean, who cares if you, I'm sorry, were you going to say
No,
something?
no, I think you're sharing so much, so many insights. I was thinking that sometimes the stigma is almost thrust upon patients too. So it becomes an issue with themselves, but maybe it was triggered by something or a word or something that a caregiver, as in also a health caregiver, might have said. What are your thoughts about that too, and how to react to
Yeah,
that?
that's such a great point, Mike, because we hear that so often that patients feel as though they did this to themselves, or it's something that a medical provider, a caregiver, or a friend, when they're sharing their diagnosis, may say that like triggers them. And I would just say that, you know, to sit in that is a very dangerous place to be. Like, it doesn't matter how you got to where you are. You are where you are. So what can you do to move forward? And I think, again, I'm such a, in case you can't tell, a proponent of having a solid support system around you.
Yeah.
And I think the value of being surrounded by other patients or other caregivers is they understand. When you share your experiences, there's others that have gone through that and they can share their hope. They can share what they went through, how they dealt with that. This is such a misunderstood disease on so many levels by so many people. And there are so many stigmas tied to it. And it can be very hard as a patient in the moment, especially if you're newly diagnosed, to take yourself out of that and to really focus on what you're truly going through, and let these outside forces kind of go.
So
And kind of like let them go.
at what point would you involve a family member. So let's say patients find out just because they had a blood test or an ultrasound or some other scan. That's how they found out that they have MASLD or even MASH if it advanced that far. So should they bring somebody from their family or a friend to the for the first time that they go see the physician, or go alone, or what do you recommend?
I recommend bringing someone the first time. I mean, everybody is obviously different, but one thing that I will say that I hear over and over again, and I know even with my parents, my mom going to doctor's appointments with my dad, there are things that my mom heard from the doctor that my dad didn't hear. When you go to a when you're newly diagnosed with any disease and you go to a doctor's appointment, it is so overwhelming. Yes. And they're throwing so much at you. So to have another person there, some other actually things that I've heard from our patient community that I thought were great is one, obviously note taking. A patient shared recently, and I cannot remember who it was, but I thought this was fabulous, that they ask their doctor if they can record the appointment.
Mhm.
So I do think you need permission for that. I would not just go in and start recording without asking, the medical professional, but then you can go back and listen. But I think also just to your original question is just having a friend, a family member, somebody to be there with you because you're going to be hearing a lot of information. It's very hard to digest. And then there's the emotional piece on top of it, right? And I think that emotional piece especially is so critical.
So
That's worth
thinking
it.
back to your father that had, pretty serious liver disease when he was diagnosed, what do you think went through his mind when he first found out? Because it's probably pretty common now with other patients, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think not to speak for my dad here, but I
You've
do
shared his
think that
story
yeah,
enough, though. You know
yeah,
what he's going
exactly
to
that
say.
yeah.
So,
He was shocked, especially the cirrhosis diagnosis. So first of all, I will say when he first was told about just like fatty liver, there was no big deal made about it. So he didn't really think much of it. He was much more focused on his diabetes at that time. But by the time the NASH, now MASH, it is time it was NASH, diagnosis came, it came right hand in hand with the cirrhosis diagnosis. And it was kind of like, wow, how did this happen? And there was fear there. So I think some of the common questions like is death around the corner? I mean, I hate to say it like that, but
yeah.
I mean, that's common, right? That's something to think about. How did this happen to me? What can I do? And that's one thing that I really appreciate about my dad is he is a very positive person. So he does not, look back and say, I mean, how did I get here? But not where he harps upon it, right? And
Solution.
self-condemns himself.
He's solution oriented, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's actually the perfect way to describe it. And then it's what do I do? So he did do what I do not recommend is he became Dr. Google and started Googling. And there's a lot of, especially at that time, because this was, over
Yeah.
quite a while ago. There was a lot of misinformation and conflicting information out there, and that can, add fear. But looking for credible sources to help you gain the information, I think can help help you mentally as well to give you a sound mind. But I think what was going through his mind is how did I get here? What do I do? And we were very fortunate that he got some good people to surround him,
For sure.
especially my
Because
mom. My
and
mom's and she's the
hearing.
we call her an angel on earth because she
Yeah.
she's a wonderful
So
support
your
person.
mother who is leading the discussion groups with patients and support groups, has she shared with you what maybe one or two of the most common questions that people are asking? Do you recall?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things is how did this happen? That's, and when the topics that are most requested, because on our support group, we have a format, but, people share together directly, and then we can guest speakers sometimes, and then that spurs conversation. The two biggest requests are around mental health and are around nutrition. But she has people that come into the group and they're just in shock. They're in shock. It's kind of like their life just changed overnight. And it's like, what do I do? Like, I just need to surround myself. There's confusion. confusion is a big one that people do not, they come into the support group not fully understanding how they got this disease, what they're supposed to do. There's frustration because to what you said earlier about stigma, a stigma still exists very heavily around liver disease. And a lot of times people who end up coming in from, metabolic associated liver disease and they've never drank, suddenly they have friends and family saying, "Oh, were you a closet drinker? I never knew you drink." And they feel this sense of judgment suddenly put upon them, which again, I can say this because I'm in recovery. I'm not saying, oh, somebody who never drank is better than somebody who got liver disease from drinking, right? I want to be very clear about that because that's really important to me. But there's a stigma, out there just around liver disease overall.
And what do you think is there anything else that we should share with patients that might be of concern that you haven't talked about yet? But, I mean,
Yeah,
it's a big area to talk about it on just a few minutes. I get that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the mental health aspect as it relates to chronic disease, specifically liver disease, and especially like MASLD and MASH, I mentioned the attitude of gratitude, having that healthy attitude, being honest with yourself and with others about what you're going through, how you're feeling, and having that support system. But one thing that I did not hit on also, I think, is boundaries. And boundaries are very important when you're going through any disease, not just for the patient, but I would say actually especially for the caregiver. Because people, you may have been in a place in life where people expect, you would do things that you can no longer do. Or maybe you don't want to talk with certain people about your disease because they don't make you feel good, right? So I think it's really important to be comfortable setting boundaries as well. I think that's so important for your mental health for anybody, quite frankly. But especially when you're going through, through a newly diagnosed disease, for both the patients and the caregiver. So I think boundaries are a critical piece.
Okay, no, thanks for sharing that. I do want you to let people know now, for sure, how if they are looking to get maybe, I know it's scary the first time, you don't know who to even contact. You suggested going online too, but with your mother's group that does quite well, maybe you just want to share how they could get involved. There's a lot of physicians that are watching this and nurses and other care specialists as well as patients. So how could they join?
Yep, absolutely. So we actually are in the process of kind of more centralizing how you can like submit a form to sign up. But right now, it is support group, all one word, no spaces in between, support group at liver advocates with an S .org. If you email us, we can send you information about the support group. We also have a support group page on our website at liveradvocates.org as well. We have, a few monthly meetings, different time zones every month. We have different topics. If the meetings are big enough, we do breakout rooms. Maybe for caregivers, maybe for patients, potentially even different disease states. As I said as well, we have some experts come in and talk about different topics, nutrition, mental health, screenings, clinical trials, all different kinds of things that are top of mind for patients and that they have a lot of questions about. So support group at liveradvocates.org. If you just shoot an email that you want more information, that's really the best way at this time.
Okay, that's fantastic. Gina, you are awesome. You're passionate, you're caring, and you're making such a huge difference. And I thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mike. The feeling's mutual. Thank you.